The guard's keys trembled in his hands as he unlocked the cell door on Robben Island. Muhammad Ali stood in the narrow corridor, his usually confident frame somehow smaller in the suffocating concrete walls of South Africa's most notorious prison. What happened next would shatter everything the world thought it knew about courage, and the conversation that followed would remain buried for decades until now. If you're watching this story unfold and already feeling the weight of what's coming, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Click that hype button, because what you're about to witness will change how you see both of these legends forever. This isn't just history, this is the moment two giants discovered they were more alike than anyone imagined. The year was 1993, and the world was watching South Africa's delicate transition from apartheid. Ali had flown in secretly, his Parkinson's already beginning to slow his once lightning reflexes, but his determination burned fiercer than ever. The South African government, desperate for international legitimacy, had arranged what they thought would be a simple photo opportunity. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the cramped visiting room. Mandela emerged from his cell wearing the same khaki uniform he'd worn for 27 years, his hair now completely grey, his hands weathered from decades of hard labour in the limestone quarries. But his eyes, those eyes still held the fire that had terrified a regime. Ali's hands shook slightly as he extended them toward Mandela, not from his condition, but from something deeper. "They told me you were broken," Ali whispered, his voice barely audible above the humming lights. "They told me you'd given up." Mandela's response would echo through history, but first he did something unexpected. He smiled, not the diplomatic smile the world knew, but something raw and genuine that seemed to light up the entire room. "Muhammad," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades, "they told me the same thing about you." The two men sat across from each other at a metal table bolted to the floor, and what unfolded next defied every expectation. This wasn't the meeting of a sports hero and a political prisoner. This was the collision of two souls who had sacrificed everything for their beliefs, and the conversation that followed would reveal secrets that neither man had ever shared with the world. Ali leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "I lost everything, Nelson. My titles, my money, my prime years. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it." The admission hung in the air like a confession, and for a moment the greatest heavyweight champion in history looked like a lost child seeking guidance. Mandela's response came slowly, deliberately. "Muhammad, do you know what kept me alive in here? It wasn't hope for freedom. It wasn't dreams of revenge. It was knowing that somewhere out there, a young man from Louisville was willing to lose everything rather than fight a war he didn't believe in. You gave me strength when I had none left." The guard stationed by the door would later testify that he had to turn away, overwhelmed by the raw emotion filling the small room. These weren't just two famous men meeting. This was the moment when two legends realized they had been carrying each other's burdens without ever knowing it. But what Ali said next would change everything. His hands reached across the table, grasping Mandela's weathered fingers, and he spoke words that would remain classified in government files for 30 years. "Nelson, I need to tell you something I've never told anyone, the real reason I refuse to fight. Are you ready for this revelation? Because what you're about to hear will completely rewrite everything you thought you knew about Muhammad Ali's most famous stand. Comment ready if you can handle the truth that's been hidden for decades." The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of waves crashing against Robben Island's rocky shores. Ali's voice cracked as he continued. "It wasn't just about Vietnam. It wasn't just about my faith. The night before I was supposed to report for duty, I had a dream. I saw a man in prison, an old man with kind eyes, and he was telling me that my choice would give him strength to survive another day. "I saw you, Nelson, 20 years before I knew who you were." Mandela's composure, legendary for its unshakable calm, finally cracked. Tears began streaming down his face as he gripped Ali's hands tighter. "Muhammad, I had the same dream the same night. I saw a young boxer standing in front of cameras, refusing to back down, and I knew that if he could sacrifice everything for his principles, I could survive another year in this place." The guard by the door would later describe this moment as the most profound thing he had ever witnessed. Two men, separated by continents and circumstances, had been spiritually connected across decades of struggle. But the story was far from over. Ali pulled something from his pocket, a small, worn piece of paper that he had carried for 26 years. His hands shaking more violently now, he unfolded it carefully. "I wrote this the night I refused induction. I never showed it to anyone, not even my wife." He slid the paper across the table to Mandela. Mandela's eyes widened as he read the handwritten words. The paper contained a letter addressed to the prisoner of Robben Island, written years before Ali even knew Mandela's name. The letter spoke of solidarity, of shared sacrifice, of the belief that somewhere in the world someone else was paying the price for standing up to injustice. "How did you know?" Mandela whispered, his voice barely audible. Ali's response would become the most quoted words, never officially recorded, "Because pain recognizes pain, brother, and courage calls to courage across any distance." What happened next defied every protocol, every rule, every expectation of how such meetings were supposed to unfold. Mandela stood up, walked around the table, and embraced Ali. Not the formal handshake the cameras were expecting, but a deep, prolonged embrace between two warriors who had finally found each other. The government officials watching through the one-way glass were unprepared for what they witnessed next. Both men began to weep openly, their tears mixing with decades of suppressed emotion. The simple photo opportunity had become something far more powerful and dangerous, a moment of genuine human connection that threatened to expose the hollow nature of the political theater surrounding them. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As they held each other, Mandela whispered something in Ali's ear that would change the boxer's life forever. The words were so quiet that even the sophisticated recording equipment couldn't capture them, but Ali's reaction was immediate and profound. His entire body went rigid, and when he pulled back to look at Mandela, his eyes held a mixture of shock, gratitude, and something that looked almost like relief. "You knew," Ali said, not as a question, but as a statement of wonder. "All this time, you knew." Mandela nodded slowly. "The struggle chooses its warriors, Muhammad. We don't choose the struggle, and sometimes the universe sends us exactly the ally we need, exactly when we need them, even if we can't see them." The meeting was supposed to last 30 minutes. It stretched to 3 hours. The government officials grew increasingly nervous as the conversation deepened, moving far beyond the scripted pleasantries they had expected. These two men were sharing secrets, strategies, and sorrows that had shaped their lives in ways the world had never understood. Ali spoke about the nights he lay awake, wondering if his sacrifice had meant anything to anyone. Mandela shared the moments when despair had nearly broken him, when only the thought of others fighting similar battles had kept him alive. They discovered that their darkest moments had often coincided, as if they had been unconsciously supporting each other across the vast distances that separated them. As the afternoon wore on, something extraordinary began to happen. Other prisoners, despite strict orders to remain in their cells, began gathering near the visiting room. Word had spread through the prison's underground communication network that something unprecedented was taking place. The guards, moved by what they were witnessing, made the unprecedented decision to allow it. One by one, men who had been imprisoned for decades began filing past the visiting room window. They didn't speak, they couldn't, but they pressed their hands against the glass in silent salute to both men. Ali and Mandela, noticing the gathering, moved to the window and placed their hands against the glass from the inside, creating a moment of connection that transcended every barrier the apartheid system had built. The image of dozens of hands pressed against glass, separated by inches but connected by something far more powerful than physical proximity, would become the unofficial symbol of that day. But the cameras weren't rolling for this part. This moment belonged only to the men who lived it. As the day drew to a close, both men knew they were facing an ending that felt more like a beginning. The world outside was changing, and they had played crucial roles in that transformation. But more importantly, they had found in each other a reflection of their own courage, a validation of their own sacrifices. Ali's final words to Mandela were delivered with the same intensity he had once brought to the boxing ring. "Nelson, when you walk out of here, and you will walk out of here, remember that every step you take toward freedom, you're taking for both of us. You're carrying my dreams too." Mandela's response carried the weight of prophecy. "And when the world forgets why we suffered, Mohammed, your story and mine will remind them that some things are worth losing everything for. We didn't just fight our battles. We fought for the idea that a man can choose his principles over his comfort, his conscience over his convenience." The handshake that ended their meeting lasted nearly a minute. Neither man wanted to let go, sensing that this moment would have to sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The government officials finally intervened, but not before both men had exchanged something that couldn't be confiscated or controlled: a piece of their souls. As Ali walked back down the corridor, his steps seemed steadier, his posture straighter. The man who had entered the prison, carrying the weight of decades of criticism and doubt, was leaving with something he hadn't possessed in years: the absolute certainty that his sacrifices had mattered to someone who understood their true cost. Mandela returned to his cell, but something fundamental had changed. The isolation that had been his constant companion for 27 years had been broken. He was no longer alone in his struggle. He had found his brother in arms, and that brotherhood would sustain him through his final months of imprisonment. The official reports of the meeting were sanitized, reduced to diplomatic pleasantries and photo opportunities. But the men who witnessed it carried the truth with them for the rest of their lives. They had seen something that defied the cynical calculations of politics and power. They had seen two human souls recognize each other across every barrier that had been built to keep them apart. Years later, when Mandela walked free and Ali's voice had been largely silenced by his condition, they would meet again. But that second meeting, public and celebrated, could never match the raw power of their first encounter. In that prison visiting room, they had found something that no government could grant and no disease could take away: the knowledge that their struggles had been shared, their sacrifices had been witnessed, and their courage had been recognized by the one person in the world who truly understood its cost. The ripple effects of that meeting extended far beyond what either man could have imagined. Prison guards went home changed, carrying stories they couldn't officially tell, but couldn't forget. Government officials found their certainties shaken by witnessing genuine human connection in a place designed to crush the human spirit. And somewhere in the files of the South African government, recordings of that conversation remain classified, too powerful and too revealing to be released even decades later. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the two men themselves. Ali, who had spent years wondering if his stand against the Vietnam War had been worth the cost, found his answer in Mandela's eyes. Mandela, who had endured decades of isolation, wondering if anyone beyond South Africa's borders understood his struggle, discovered that his most powerful ally had been fighting the same battle on a different continent. The world would remember them as icons, as symbols, as legends. But in that small room on Robben Island, they were simply two men who had chosen the harder path and found, in each other, the validation that their choices had been right. They had sacrificed their primes, their freedoms, their easy paths to glory, and in return they had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that they had lived according to their deepest convictions. As we reflect on this encounter that brought the world to tears, we're reminded that true courage isn't the absence of doubt. It's the willingness to act on your principles, even when the cost seems unbearable. Both Ali and Mandela faced moments when surrender would have been easier, when compromise would have been understandable, when the world would have forgiven them for choosing comfort over conviction. But they didn't choose the easy path, and in their refusal to bend, they created something unbreakable. A legacy that continues to inspire anyone who faces the choice between what's convenient and what's right. Their meeting on Robben Island wasn't just the collision of two great lives. It was proof that the universe sometimes rewards our greatest sacrifices by showing us that we were never alone in making them. What moment in your own life required you to choose between comfort and conviction? Share your story in the comments below, and let's continue the conversation that Ali and Mandela started in that prison room. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that courage, once shared, becomes contagious.